On March 6, 1944, at an altitude of 28,000 feet above Brandenburg, Germany, Major Hans Kogler felt his oxygen mask freeze to his face as he searched the clear, icy sky through the canopy of his Messerschmitt Bf 109G6. Heading his diverse group of fighters toward the bomber stream his ground controllers had guaranteed would be flying alone at this height and this deep inside the Reich. Akong, Indiana at 12 o'clock high. Single-engine fighters bearing drop tanks. The alert sounded in his headset, rising with anxiety. Kogler's veins seemed to run with ice. American fighters, single-engine types, present above Brandenburg, under 50 miles from Berlin. It could not be true. No single-engine Allied fighter boasted the range necessary to come this far into Germany and return to England. The farthest escort distance for the American P-47 Thunderbolt was Aachen, barely intruding into German territory. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning might stretch as far as Hanover under favorable conditions, but never Brandenburg or Berlin. This development upended every estimate, expectation, and defensive measure the Luftwaffe had relied on since the onset of the American daylight bombing offensive. As Kogler observed the shining silver silhouettes of aircraft enlarge, their distinctively squared wingtips and streamlined contours becoming evident, he realized with perfect certainty that he was witnessing the start of the collapse. They were neither the squat Thunderbolts nor the twin-boomed Lightnings he and his men had fought at their maximum range. They were North American P-51B Mustangs, soaring with the assurance of predators aware they possessed surplus fuel, spare altitude, and ample opportunity to engage. 730 heavy bombers belonging to the 8th Air Force were drawing near to Berlin. Not the standard ruse aimed at the capital before diverting to lesser targets, but a straightforward strike at the core of the Third Reich. And for the first time in air warfare history, single-engine fighters would accompany the bombers every step to Berlin and back. What Kogler, leading his force of 7 twin-engine Mi-10 and 41 Mi-1000s and 9s, did not realize was that this episode would set off the deepest psychological collapse in the annals of military aviation. It would devastate not merely machines and men but also the fundamental faith that had kept German air dominance since 1939. The calculus of obliteration was being etched not in ministry conference halls but in the contrails streaking at 28,000 feet over Brandenburg. The surprise had actually started weeks prior, though hardly any leaders in the Luftwaffe's upper ranks had assembled the puzzle pieces. On January 11, 1944, Major Hermann Göring, commanding JG-11, came across American single-engine fighters close to Brunswick, 150 miles farther into German territory than their fuel allowed. His subsequent debrief concluded these fighters must have refueled in clandestine Swedish bases, and Berlin dismissed the notion as combat fatigue distorting perception. But the reports grew more frequent. Hanover on January 29, Magdeburg on February 3. Each new report extended the perceived American fighter reach farther east, and each was met by official skepticism. The Reich Air Ministry circulated a bulletin on February 15 flatly stating that sightings of American single-engine fighters east of the Ruhr were actually errors, likely mistaking twin-engine P-38s or friendly planes. Pilots making such statements were to face medical scrutiny. The actual explanation was more unnerving than theories of secret Swedish airfields or pilot delusions. At Wright Field, Ohio, American technicians had done what German engineers had called utterly impossible, stretching the P-51B Mustang's operational radius to over 650 miles with disposable auxiliary fuel tanks. The math appeared to defy the principles of aerodynamics. A single-engine fighter loaded with enough fuel to go 1,300 miles while still fighting effectively was, according to German analysis, unattainable engineering. Hedman Heinznock, who led the 2nd Squadron of Jagdgeschwader 11, recorded in his diary in the early months of 1944, "We were confident in our calculations. American single-engine fighters could accompany bombers only 280 miles from their English airfields, never farther. This left all of eastern and central Germany open for us to strike bomber formations without risk of escort. The math was clear. Fuel load divided by consumption yields range. The Americans could not alter the constants of physics. However, the Americans did not rewrite the laws of physics. Instead, they exploited them more ingeniously than anyone in the German command dreamed possible. The key was found not in the planes themselves, but in two groundbreaking advances that German intelligence failed to notice or discounted as enemy exaggeration: the Packard-manufactured Merlin engine and the British-designed paper drop tanks. The Packard 51650-3 installed in the P-51B went beyond being a simple license-built Rolls-Royce Merlin. It was a refined model, built to standards surpassing those of the original British design. With streamlined mass production methods perfected in Detroit's car industry, Packard accomplished something exceptional. The engine generated 1,490 horsepower at sea level, sustaining over 1,200 horsepower at 30,000 feet owing to its two-stage, two-speed supercharger. Oberfeldwebel Konrad Bauer, a technical expert in JG-26, inspected a downed P-51B near Gütersloh in February 1944. His report, retrieved from Luftwaffe records after the conflict ended, exposes German astonishment. The engine mounting is a tour de force of engineering efficiency. Its intercooler is beyond anything our Daimler-Benz 605 can claim. Most astonishing, however, is the production standard. Each part demonstrates watchmakers' precision in its fabrication. Yet it is said the Americans are turning out 3 such engines every hour. If so, victory hinges not on pilot skill but the capacity of the factories. The drop tanks were a still subtler innovation. Made from pressed paper infused with plastic resin, these 108-gallon auxiliary tanks weighed only 35 pounds, empty, lighter than the ammunition for a single Mustang machine gun. Engineers at Britain's Royal Aircraft Establishment designed the laminated paper tank, which could safely carry fuel for about 5 hours before decomposing. That easily covered the 2.5-hour flight to Berlin. German designers had tried auxiliary tanks too, but their philosophy was fundamentally different. The German versions were metallic, reusable, costly, and weighty. They hindered performance so much that fighters equipped with them became easy prey. The American paper tanks, though, were inexpensive, single-use, and very light. 2 108-gallon tanks enabled a P-51B to fly to Berlin, drop the tanks just before engagement, and then battle at full effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, leading the 56th Fighter Group, described the operational breakthrough in a 1944 address. The German defenders had anticipated we would ration our fuel to preserve enough for dogfights and return trips. However, equipped with drop tanks, we could use fuel extravagantly. We would utilize the external tanks to cruise toward Berlin, release them, and still retain our entire internal fuel reserve for 30 minutes of full-throttle combat, in addition to the return flight. We no longer found ourselves operating at the limit. We had excess capacity to use. To truly comprehend the psychological effect of March 6, 1944, one first needs to recognize the trauma experienced on October 14, 1943, known as Black Thursday. On that day, the 8th Air Force tried to destroy the Schweinfurt ball-bearing plants without long-range fighter coverage. Out of 291 B-17 flying fortresses that entered German airspace, 60 were brought down and 138 suffered damage, representing a loss rate of 20.6% with over 600 aircrew casualties. The Luftwaffe demonstrated with striking effectiveness that daylight bombing missions without escort could not be sustained. General Ira Eaker, who led the 8th Air Force, had to completely halt missions that penetrated deeply into enemy territory. General Major Adolf Galland, General der Jagdflieger, proclaimed October 14 as the greatest success for the Jagdwaffe in the defensive campaign. In his memoir After the War, The First and the Last, he stated, following Schweinfurt, we believed we had shown daylight precision raids to be a flawed idea. The Americans would have no choice but to adopt British nighttime bombing, where accuracy was unattainable and destruction was limited. We had prevailed in the battle of doctrine. Yet despite Gallen's tactical brilliance, he made a vital misjudgment. He supposed the Americans would accept the boundaries of current technology instead of creating new advancements. When intelligence about a new American fighter with exceptional range came to him in December 1943, he disregarded it. When his pilots themselves reported seeing single-engine fighters over Hanover in January 1944, he accused them of hallucination. Only on February 20, 1944, the first day of Big Week, did Gallen begin to understand the scale of the danger. The Americans sent out 1,000 bombers with 835 fighter escorts, featuring the first large operational use of P-51Bs. During the following 5 days, the Luftwaffe lost 262 fighters and, more crucially, 100 veteran pilots, making up 17% of their seasoned fighter contingent. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Gallen, Adolf's younger sibling, who led 3 JG-26, commented post-Big Week, "The arrival of the Mustangs changed the scenario entirely. Earlier we could place ourselves outside the range of escorts and engage bombers systematically. Now, we were forced to fight past their escorts to reach the bombers, and then battle our way out again. Every sortie turned into a fight for survival from takeoff until landing." On March 6, 1944, the morning broke clear and frigid over northern Europe. It was ideal flying weather. At RAF Leiston in England, ground personnel had labored through the night preparing the 357th Fighter Group for their most daring assignment so far, becoming the first P-51 squadron to escort bombers the whole distance to Berlin. Colonel Henry Spicer, leading the 357th Fighter Group, addressed his pilots at 0600 hours. He said, "Gentlemen, today we go to Big B for the full route. We'll remain over enemy territory for 4 hours. Any pilot who feels his aircraft is not perfect should abort before departure. At these ranges, there are no do-overs. None elected to abort." Despite this, Colonel Spicer himself ended up aborting soon after departing due to mechanical trouble, prompting Major Thomas L. Hayes to take over command of this landmark mission. At 8:30, 730 heavy bombers started launching from airfields throughout East Anglia. Following them, 796 fighters prepared to furnish continuous escort, P-47s for the entry phase, P-38s for the intermediate portion, and P-51 Mustangs for the farthest penetration and direct target coverage. The 357th Fighter Group dispatched 48 P-51Bs, with only 33 successfully managing to reach Berlin due to mechanical failures and navigational difficulties amid thick clouds. Over in Germany, the Reich's Jagdfliegerführung and Flak defense radar outposts began detecting the huge bomber stream as it gathered over the North Sea. Plotters stationed at Doberitz, the main center for Berlin's fighter command, at first interpreted this as another ruse. The Americans had previously neared Berlin repeatedly, always diverting at the last moment to hit sites in western Germany. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, who commanded the 2nd Fighter Division tasked with protecting Berlin, examined the radar plots and made a consequential call. He would keep his fighter planes grounded until the bombers firmly committed to hitting their intended target. There was no reason to waste fuel in case this was another feint. At 11:30, the lead formation of bombers entered German territory near Arnhem. The accompanying P-47s engaged German fighters that were taking off from bases in Holland and western Germany. Everything unfolded as it usually did. Luftwaffe pilots attacked, but did so warily, holding back until the time they expected would arrive. The American escorts would eventually reach their fuel threshold and have to turn back. By 12:55, as the bomber column neared Berlin, Major Hans Kogler led his diverse formation to intercept what they anticipated were bombers without their escorts. His unit was made up of 7 Messed Bf-110 night fighters pressed into daytime action alongside 41 single-engine Bf-109s. German radar had monitored the P-47s as they turned for home and assumed the bombers now lacked protection. Major Thomas Hayes, in command of the 357th Fighter Group's 33 Mustangs, which managed to reach Berlin after navigating bad weather, later recounted the events in his combat report. We punched through the clouds to see B-24 Liberators below and to our port side. At the same moment, we sighted about 40 enemy airplanes moving to line up for an assault. Me-110s and Me-109s. They did not see us. We had the superior altitude and total surprise. The German group, entirely focused on the bombers, did not spot the Mustangs until it was too late to react. Hayes dove at the German aircraft, radioing, "Greenhouse Squadron, Greenhouse Leader here. Bandits at 2 o'clock low, jettison tanks and go in." Feldwebel Jan Muller of JG-11, piloting and escorting Bf-109, survived and later recalled what happened. "We were in ideal formation, just starting our attack dive on the bombers, when tracer fire shot past my canopy. I glanced upward to see single-prop fighters with American insignia diving toward us from higher altitude. It felt impossible. We were right above Berlin. My immediate thought was that these had to be captured planes, some trick. But when I observed the drop tanks falling in droves, I realized these were genuine American fighters with a range beyond what we believed. The ensuing fight was not a battle, but an execution. The German pilots, taken completely by surprise and unable to recover their position, broke apart in panic. During 12 minutes of fighting, the 357th Fighter Group claimed 20 downed enemy aircraft, suffering no losses of P-51s. Hayes personally destroyed a Bf-1009 flying low near Welsen and then led Mustangs to strafe a German airbase. At his Karenhol estate, 50 miles north of Berlin, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring was eating lunch when the message came from General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland. American fighters were present over Berlin. Single-engine types. "You are wrong, Galland," said Göring bluntly. "Double-check your sources. Herr Reichsmarschall, I have eyes on verification from several units. P-51 Mustangs are fighting our fighters above Potsdam right now." Göring's temper erupted. According to his aide, Aust Bernd von Brauch, who was in the room, the Reichsmarschall hurled his wineglass at the wall and shouted, "This is treason, sabotage. The pilots are lying to hide their own lack of courage. I will have anyone making such statements court-martialed." Yet as Göring continued his tirade, the proof was overwhelming. From his estate, he could directly observe vapor trails over Berlin, and hear the distant roar of aircraft engines at maximum power. His aide would later say that Göring stood by the window for nearly an hour, silently watching the skies. That night, Göring released what became his most notorious directive of the air conflict. Any flyer claiming to have spotted American single-engine fighters above Berlin was to be detained for cowardice and for spreading defeatist rumors. The longest possible range for American fighters is the Ru. This is scientifically proven. This directive threw fighter wings, already shaken from their casualties, into turmoil. Pilots who made it through skirmishes with P-51s now faced the threat of court-martial for simply reporting what they saw. Several squadron leaders, such as Major Garral, flatly disregarded the directive and instructed their flyers to list only twin-engine fighters in combat reports. General Major Galland, in a charged meeting at the Air Ministry on March 8, presented Göring with a piece from a P-51 drop tank marked "Made in USA" and collected from a field near Magdeburg. Göring's retort entered Luftwaffe folklore. "I do not care if you deliver an entire Mustang on a silver tray. The Americans cannot fly escort to Berlin. It cannot happen scientifically." It was then, Galland recorded in his memoirs, that he realized Germany was defeated in the war. Later at the Nuremberg trials, Göring confessed, "When I saw American fighters above Berlin, I realized it was finished." For Luftwaffe pilots as individuals, seeing Mustangs appear over Berlin was more than a tactical shock. It marked a profound existential dilemma. These men had been assured repeatedly that they were defending an invulnerable stronghold, that German technology and engineering surpassed anything the Allies could make. Hauptmann Heinz Nock, who led the 2nd Squadron of Jagdgeschwader 11, recorded in his diary on March 7, 1944, "Yesterday altered everything. We always knew the places where we were protected, where we could regroup, the places we could attack without interruption. That sense of certainty has disappeared. If they are able to reach Berlin, they are capable of reaching anywhere. Now we are the ones being hunted instead of hunting, even over our own capital city. The psychological effect was intensified due to the superiority of the enemy. The P-51B's presence over Berlin was not simply noticed. It asserted supremacy. The Mustang's Merlin engine enabled a maximum velocity of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, exceeding the Bf-109 G6 at 386 miles per hour at that same elevation. Its laminar flow wings allowed outstanding maneuverability at high altitudes. Its .50 caliber machine guns provided powerful concentrated bursts, and, most importantly, its airmen were rested, not worn out from long missions with barely enough fuel. Unteroffizier Werner Peck of JG 301 survived facing P-51s on March 9 and recounted the event. They dove in from above and behind, always maintaining the superior height. When we turned to fight back, they would climb sharply away. They possessed the thrust to ascend vertically at will. If we attempted to escape by diving, they easily kept up. They operated as if they had limitless fuel, swooping down several times and trailing us to low altitudes. We were accustomed to American fighters who had to mind their fuel, making only one attack before breaking away home. These Mustangs treated us like cats playing with trapped mice. Johannes Steinhoff, commander of JG-77, later recounted the transformation in strategy. We had to suppose every bomber group included Mustang escorts, regardless of whether we could spot them. Large-scale attacks were over, and we could no longer take time to maneuver into position. We had to strike without delay using whatever forces we had, endure greater casualties, and try to hit the bombers before the Mustangs intercepted us. Continues in the next chunks, following original order and content.